After weeks of escalating confrontation that brought Washington and Tehran to the brink of a wider regional war, a sudden and unexpected pause has emerged. A 2-week ceasefire announced at the last possible moment has halted imminent U.S. strikes and reopened the narrow diplomatic window. But beneath this fragile calm lie deeper questions. Was this a strategic recalibration or a forced retreat under pressure? Did deterrence succeed or fail? And can a temporary pause translate into a sustainable political settlement, or is this merely the prelude to a more dangerous phase of conflict? With global energy markets shaken, military forces still on alert, and trust between both sides at a historic low, the stakes remain extraordinarily high. So are we witnessing the beginning of de-escalation or simply a pause before the next confrontation? Let's continue our special coverage on Qnews. Iran has presented a sweeping 10-point ceasefire proposal that forms the basis of current negotiations with the United States. But it is widely seen as maximalist and highly contentious. The plan includes demands to lift all U.S. sanctions, unfreeze Iranian assets, and withdraw American forces from the region alongside guarantees of non-aggression. It also calls for continued Iranian control and supervision of the Strait of Hormuz, and implicitly it preserves Tehran's right to nuclear enrichment. Some elements, such as a compensation for war damage and a binding UN resolution, go even further, making full acceptance unlikely. Despite this, the proposal is being treated as a negotiating framework, helping secure the current 2-week ceasefire while deeper talks continue. A behind-the-scenes account reveals that the ceasefire was driven less by public diplomacy and more by covert decisions at the highest level in Tehran. According to Axios, Iran's supreme leader Mojtaba Khamenei quietly authorized negotiators to pursue a truce, communicating through mediators due to assassination fears, marking the first serious diplomatic move since the war began. This secret outreach unfolded even as Donald Trump escalated public threats, creating a dual track of confrontation and negotiation. The breakthrough came just before a U.S. strike deadline, with Iran agreeing to engage and Israel brought on board beforehand. The result? A fragile ceasefire shaped by back-channel diplomacy, mutual pressure, and deep uncertainty. Europe is not a passive actor in the Iran war. It holds significant but underused leverage, according to the Council on Foreign Relations. Europe's main source of influence lies in its critical role in enabling U.S. military operations. Its network of air bases and logistic hubs, using for refueling, transport and command, makes it indispensable to Washington's campaign. In addition, Ukraine-linked drone expertise, supported by European cooperation, has become important in countering Iranian capabilities. At the same time, Europe is highly exposed to the war's consequences, especially energy shocks, inflation, and pressure on defense resources diverted from Ukraine. The article argues that Europe should use this dual position, operational necessity and economic vulnerability, to shape US decisions, limit escalation, and protect its strategic priorities, especially NATO cohesion and support for Ukraine. The announcement of a 2-week ceasefire between the United States and Iran did not emerge from a position of clarity, but from a moment of maximum tension. Reports indicate that military action was not only imminent, but already in motion before being abruptly halted. Behind closed doors, strategic disagreements, intelligence warnings, and international pressure appear to have reshaped the course of events within hours. Yet while the guns may have temporarily fallen silent, the underlying conflict remains unresolved. The reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, the role of mediators, and the condition attached to this pause all suggest that this is less an agreement and more a test of intentions, leverage, and endurance. And to unpack what this moment means and what could come next, we're joined by two distinguished guests. From Moscow, international relations and political analyst Monica Hanna, and from Brussels, former NATO official Nicholas Williams. A very warm welcome to both our distinguished guests, and it's a pleasure to have you here on Qnews on a very special historic day. Miss Monica, we start off with you. Let me start with asking, how should we interpret this ceasefire? Is it a genuine opening for diplomacy or simply a tactical pause under pressure?
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me today. The ceasefire should be understood, as you said before, primarily as a tactical pause under pressure, rather than a genuine or a stable diplomatic path. The timing of the agreement, which coming just 2 hours before the expectation of the U.S. Escalation, strongly suggests that both U.S. and Iran were approaching to highly dangerous threat where escalation could quickly turn into a large scale and uncontrollable confrontation. And in this such situation, I guess that states choose temporary de-escalation not because they have resolved their divergences and still there are a lot of differences between the two sides, but because the cost of immediate conflict. Let me go into some details in this regard. From the American perspective, the ceasefire reflects the limits of coercive diplomacy. The Trump administration relied on the classic brinkmanship strategy, raising threats to the highest possible level in order to force Iran into concession. However, the last-minute shift toward a ceasefire, which indicates that U.S. wasn't fully prepared to carry out its threat, especially given the potential consequences. A large attack on Iranian infrastructure could trigger a regional war and disrupted global energy markets and increase domestic economic pressure in, of course, United States. And of course, there is a lot of strategic calculations in this regard. The President Trump, which tackle and try to deal with these pressures, and there is a lot of tactical procedures that taken last week, for instance, reduce the cost of war and gradual de-escalation strategy. It's very important for his strategy nowadays.
Okay, Ms. Monica, are you done?
And yeah, and from the Iran
Okay, I want to ask you a question, please, here. Did you expect that Donald Trump would suspend the ultimatum 2 hours before he was supposed to be threatening to bring Iran on the ground and to end everything in Iran and to devastate Iran completely? And another question is, you said that there was diversity and the ultimatum changed suddenly due to diplomacy. Which kind of diplomacy, from your point of view, did you read that took place in 2 hours and changed everything 180 degrees suddenly?
There is, I guess it's not the suddenly decision. It's according or linked to domestic pressure, as I mentioned. Trump proposed increasing, for instance, defense spending to 1.5 trillion, while cutting non-defense spending by 10%. This creates pressure inside the Republican Party and raises concern about the long-term costs. So ceasefire helped reduce immediate financial and political risks, and on the other side reflects of the limit of its pressure strategy. He tried to give a 50-day negotiation window, trying to force Iran, of course, into concession, but in the end US agreed to 2 weeks ceasefire, which shows that United States wasn't ready, as we mentioned, to pay the full cost of escalation. It's a highly cost, and
But
there
Ms.
is a
Monica,
lot
I
of
got your
calculation
point.
on
The
that.
United States was not ready to pay the cost. Mr. Williams, from a NATO and transatlantic perspective, how close did this situation come to triggering a broader military confrontation, sir?
Well, as your guest from Moscow says, it came very close to triggering a major confrontation. And there was a major confrontation regionally already taking place. But, and again, as your guest from Moscow said, President Trump had his own reasons for seeking a way out and proclaiming a sort of victory for his own negotiating or at least threatening powers. So yes, it came close, but I don't think the United States administration and system wanted to take the next step. I think they looked into the abyss and were, in fact, clutching at any proposal, any idea that a ceasefire could take place.
Yes, Mr. Williams, that's what I confirmed with Ms. Monica upon her answer, that the United States was not ready to fully pay the costs. Ms. Monica, back again to you. Iran agreed to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. How significant is this concession strategically?
Of course, the opening, and of course, let me ensure that the Strait of Hormuz is very critical, and the strategic pressure card within Iran hand is highly significant strategic move to reopen this strait. It shouldn't be misunderstood as a simple concession. Instead, it's calculated by Iran aimed at managing pressure while perceiving leverages. The Strait of Hormuz is one, as we mentioned, and the most important critical checkpoints in global energy system, with large percentage of the world oil and gas shipments passing through it. So interruption, and which happen along of the following or the last weeks, have a lot of immediate global consequences, including rising energy prices and economic stability, which of course has impact in as influence on the electors or US and around the global economy.
Yes,
of course, by agreeing to reopen the strait, Iran achieved several objectives at the same time.
plus the
Indeed,
pressure from the GCC countries.
Yeah, it reduced immediate international pressure, including, of course, the Gulf countries, and particularly from major powers that depend on stable energy flows, for instance, China. Secondly, it lowers the justification for immediate U.S. military action, since one of U.S. or Trump main argument for escalation is protecting global shipping and energy security. So in this regard, reopening the strain is escalation signal from the Iran side. However, the more important point, in my point of view, is that move reinforced that Iran position as a key actor controlling a strategic checkpoint by demonstrates that it can disrupt and then restore the flow of energy. Iran effectively sent a message: the stability of global markets is linked to its own security and political demand. And I guess it's the first message tried to send from the first day of this escalation on or this war. So the transform of the Strait of Hormuz from geographic feature into a powerful political tool. It's very important in my point of view.
Following U.S. President Donald Trump's announcement of a 2-week ceasefire with Iran aimed at de-escalation and regional stability, countries around the world moved quickly to welcome the agreement. Iraq's foreign ministry expressed support for the ceasefire, while Australia also backed the deal, with Prime Minister Anthony Albanese stressing the importance of international coordination to sustain diplomatic efforts. Japan also welcomed the agreement as well, highlighted its continued diplomatic work to help ensure safe maritime passage through the Strait of Hormuz. In Southeast Asia, Malaysia Prime Minister also described Iran's 10-point proposal as an encouraging basis for restoring peace and called for it to develop into a comprehensive agreement. Indonesia similarly voiced its support. European countries also responded positively. Germany's foreign minister described the ceasefire as an important first step toward lasting peace, reaffirming Berlin's commitment to protecting navigation in the region, and thanked Pakistan for its mediation role. Oman welcomed the truce and stressed the need to intensify efforts to address the root causes of the crisis. Ukraine also praised the agreements and the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. In Britain, Prime Minister Keir Starmer announced plans to travel to the Middle East to meet regional leaders and support the ceasefire. Sudan's government, meanwhile, described the 2-week halt in military operations as a positive step toward calm and a diplomatic resolution. The announcement has triggered a broad wave of international support, reflecting a rare moment of global alignment around the need to reduce tensions, secure vital trade routes, and create space for negotiations that could prevent further escalation in the Middle East. From Asia to Europe and Africa, governments have underlined the importance of sustained dialogue, coordinated action, and a continued commitment to peace, highlighting the global significance of stability in the region. Mr. Williams, back again to you. That was breaking news, sorry. Mr. Williams, how are European allies likely to interpret the sudden shift from escalation to de-escalation, of course mentioning what you just heard me reading now about Europe's stance, and considering Europe's main source of influence lies in its critical role in enabling U.S. military operations, its network of air bases, logistic hubs, and using for refueling, transport, and command, sir?
Well, I think the Europeans, like the rest of the world, will regard this agreement, or at least agreement in principle for a ceasefire for 2 weeks, as with relief. I think the Europeans have been losers all round on this.
Sir, you said again, please, losers all around what?
All around, economically, politically, with their relations with the United States.
During the conflict, you mean?
Yes, the consequences of the conflict have been disastrous for the Europeans, but they've not been able to make their voice heard or influence felt either in the region or in the United States.
Okay, Mr.
Today,
Williams, I want you to take about Europe and maybe they decided not to get involved.
well, I don't think they decided not to get involved. Their internal processes for, prevented them from coming up with a proposal and agreement to get involved. Europe is, the EU in particular, is 27 countries unable to come to a common view on all these issues in the Middle East, or even these issues in relation to Russia. And so Europe has been a loser in this. And today, the Secretary General of NATO is in Washington. And I think that President Trump will take this opportunity to criticize the Europeans for not being able.
I think he already did, sir.
Well, yes, but it will be very public and very bitter. And Trump is in a triumphalist mode. And so he will take the opportunity even more to emphasize European unhelpfulness and weakness.
Ms. Monica, has Iran effectively turned military pressure into political leverage in this situation?
Yes, it's very clear that Iran used different tactics in this regard. Let me focus on them. It succeeds in raising the cost of a conflict over several weeks of escalation on, of course, United States. Instead of direct confrontation, it focused on indirect pressure, especially through energy routes and regional influence, such as you mentioned, as we see, of course, and follow up the Gulf countries. So by Strait of Hormuz, and which affect about 20% of global oil flows. So Iran created global economic pressure, not just a regional tension, and this forced the United States, of course, to reconsider the escalation costs and to use another tactics, which also try we see in this regard. And first of all, that Iran's strategy based on asymmetric warfare, instead on to focus on raising the cost of conflict, as we mentioned, include strengths and economic costs in this regard. And this approach forced reconsider its strategy. United States has global responsibility, and economic vulnerability disruption affect its calculation, and Iran entered now the negotiation phase not as a defeated actor, but as resilient and influential player. So it's a very important factor in this regard. So the ceasefire itself is evidence of this shift. It shows that Iran was able to affect and to withstand pressure long enough to create a situation where negotiation become necessary. And of course, this change a strategic calculation for the Donald Trump and for the contradicted messages in this regard.
Ms. Monica, how do you read Donald Trump a few hours before reaching and saying that he will suspend the ultimatum to another 2 weeks of a ceasefire, and they've reached a ceasefire? How do you read the difference between him 2 hours before saying that he will end an entire civilization, of course referring to Iran? How did you read this?
Of course, from the day one, the messages of Donald Trump, it's difficult, and of course, send message of not this. There is a miscalculation in his strategic objectives, or in his how to exit from this war. It reflects mix of threat and opinion. As we mentioned, it's brinkmanship strategy. He uses strong, aggressive language, warning the end of Iran civilization and handing devastating strikes on Iran infrastructure. This signals that willingness to escalate military and creates maximum pressure. And of course, little bit we talk on the procedures which taken inside United States and the military or Pentagon institutions. So it's different, and on the nowhere create maximum pressure, and on the other side he offered temporary pauses and ceasefire, as seen in the 2-week agreement. Sometimes emphasize potential diplomatic solution. For example, he frames that US and Iran ceasefire a complete and total victory for the United States, yet agree to negotiation process with Iran. So the contradiction lie in saying one thing but acting in a way that limit immediate escalation.
Okay, Ms. Monica, I'll leave you there and I'll come back to ask you about Israel and where does Israel stand from all of this. Minister Williams, has Washington achieved any of its core objectives through this escalation and subsequent pause?
Well, as you know, the key objectives were all over the place. According to whether Mr. Trump announced the key objectives in terms of, at the beginning, some form of regime change. But I think the Americans have, the military have achieved their objectives in terms of damaging the target list, which they set out at the beginning. They've caused immense damage to Iranian military capabilities. But the political objectives, such as they were, have not been achieved. And it's ironic that this agreement that for a ceasefire for 10 days is all about the opening up of the Straits of Hormuz. The Straits of Hormuz weren't under threat before this war, and they didn't feature in the American or Mr. Trump's original objectives. So this ceasefire is a sort of scramble for an exit, because I think the Iranians and the Americans recognize that this war can't go on in terms of its destruction, but it also in terms of the failure to achieve any political, long-standing strategic political objectives by the Americans or the Israelis.
Ms. Monica, how is the ceasefire likely being framed inside Russia and among its strategic circles?
Let's start with that. There is a lot of a statement by Russian foreign affairs last week, and of course, Russia in this rigorous ceasefire erupted pose a strategic opportunity and as a moment to stress the value of diplomatic restraint. Russia notes that the rising tension around the Strait of Hormuz directly benefit Moscow economically, for instance, because any disruption on oil flow, which count, as we said, it's high, passing through the strait is push energy prices higher. So it's a good opportunity for Russia, and these higher revenues are particularly useful in sustain Russian military operation in Ukraine, where the conflict remains costly in terms of both resources and international pressure.
Monica, we cannot deny here that Russia was gained from this war.
Yeah, it's again this war and Russia's strategic, of course, circles and a ceasefire reflect U.S. destruction and over extension and balancing multiple, while U.S. balancing multiple crises from Ukraine to Iran. There is a perception in Russia that U.S. attention and resources are being stretched now, creating indirect relief for Russia on the Ukraine front, even partial diversion of military or economic support. Of course, as you mentioned, it a frame situation at evidence of the U.S. strategic exhaustions, a combination of escalation events.
Okay, Miss Monica, I want to ask you here a question
And
which I ended.
domestic political pressure had a very impact on. At the same time, Russia, as we said, called for diplomatic retreat, highlights that escalation directly strengthens Russian interests.
Okay,
Like
Miss Monica,
last
because I'm running out of
Friday,
time. Do you
for
think,
instance, strike
Miss
directed.
Miss Monica, because I'm running out of time, do you think that any miscalculations happened due to the Israeli, of course, intervention, and maybe Israel was the one that grabbed Donald Trump into, or the United States, in other words, into this war at the beginning?
Course, overestimating for U.S. support, Israel assumes that United States, as we see yesterday or the day before, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu carry out immediate and large strikes against Iran, and with, of course, fully support of United States, its caution and the balancing domestic pressure and the global economic impact of a conflict. There is overestimating of this resilience, and on the other side, there is a lot of underestimate of Iran resilience. Israel.
True, Ms. Monica, I got
that
your point, and I really appreciate your analysis. Mr. Williams, before we end this program, because I'm running out of time, from your perspective, is 2 weeks realistically enough time to move from de-escalation towards a structured agreement, a real structured agreement, sir?
Yes, because I think the United States and Iran want to have a peace agreement, but not only that, the Pakistanis, the Egyptians, and others, Turks, also will put pressure on the Iranians and the Americans to come up with not a strategic agreement, but a continuation of the ceasefire.
Our thanks to Ms. Monica William in Moscow, and of course Mr. Nicholas Williams in Brussels for, of course, your insights and very special in-depth analysis and informative and intellectual knowledge on top of all your time on this very critical moment. As the clock ticks on this fragile ceasefire, the question remains: is this the beginning of a diplomatic path or merely a pause before the next phase of conflict? That brings us to the end of this special coverage. Thank you very much for watching, and stay tuned for more updates and special coverage extensive on Qnews. Thank you very much.